Hello, everybody. This is JT Keating. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium, and we are continuing our most wanted list. We're down to the top three most wanted mobile menaces. This one is phishing, and obviously, phishing has been around for quite some time. In fact, the first company I ever did was dealing with phishing way back in the day. And it just continues to percolate and continues to be a problem. And as you can imagine, with one of the most prolific attacks and the growth in mobile devices, the convergence of the two is a bit of a perfect storm. So that's what we are going to be talking about. All the standard stuff, we will make slides available. There will be a recording that's made available soon after. If you would like to listen to me twice for some reason, or if you'd like to share me with your colleagues, that would be great. We have deactivated the chat portion because we've had some issues with it before. And so if you have any questions, whether it's questions about the material, which I'll cover at the end, or questions about even things like technical difficulties, please just use the Q&A section of the whole thing. So without any further ado, again, my plan, like we are for all of these, is we try to keep it to way less than 30 minutes. So probably about 20 minutes or so of content, and then whatever Q&A we've got. If we don't have Q&A, we don't just throw some fake Q&A in there. We just let you guys have the rest of your afternoon. So let's dive into mobile menace number 3, which is phishing. As we talked about, we've got the whole most wanted list. We're counting down to the ones that are most dangerous, and the ones that are most dangerous are the ones that actually take over your device and enable it to be a persistent, weaponized device that can do everything from surveillance to spear phishing to all sorts of other things. We've gone through the bottom 4. Risky apps are perfectly legitimate apps that have privacy and security implications built into them. His cousin, malicious app, is exactly what we all think about, these malicious apps. Then we had 2 cousins from the network side of things, man in the middle, aka hijacktus interceptus, the man that will sit in the middle and do a network and surveillance and potentially adjust and move you to a fake site. His cousin, bad Wi-Fi, also known as rogue access points, as a primary mechanism there. This is where it's actually bad Wi-Fi and they're controlling the Wi-Fi and they decide where you're going to go. And today we are talking about our good friend, phishing. So on mobile, we always need to make sure that people understand that the threats are not the same. The threats might be the same, but the impacts of the threats are a little bit different in mobile compared to traditional operating systems. And it's important to note the difference because we have a tendency to think about number 6. We have a tendency to think about malicious apps and say, oh, that's the big problem because that's what we've dealt with on traditional endpoints. Unlike traditional endpoints, mobile endpoints, all the apps are in containers. They're containerized. What that means is apps can't play with other apps. So malicious apps themselves can either do fraud directly, that sort of stuff. What they usually try to do is elevate privileges on the device in order to be able to look across and impact other applications. A classic example of that is, which we talked about with number 6, is BankBot. And so if you're interested in that, you can go back and check number 6. The next one in this whole scheme are phishing sites. And the key to both of the phishing sites and malicious apps, or phishing here, is they're untargeted in terms of going after an enterprise. And Zimperium, first and foremost, is designed to protect enterprises against targeted attacks. We have to account for the ones that are untargeted, but we are actually really focused on targeted attacks against enterprises. Now, when you talk about phishing sites, which we're going to talk more about in a minute as we just roll through today, because that's obviously the topic, or malicious apps, actual institutions can be targeted in terms of being in them. For instance, BankBot has over 600 financial institutions that are inside of BankBot, but that's BankBot is targeting users of those. Same thing with phishing. We've got the usual, top list of phishing sites. So the brands can be targeted, but the individual is not. They just put it in there and go. If I am targeting a particular enterprise, if I'm a bad guy and targeting a particular enterprise, the most efficient way of doing it is a network attack. I actually sit in a coffee shop and I wait for somebody from XYZ Corporation, and I use either a man in the middle or I use a bad Wi-Fi to be able to understand that that's who it is, surveil the device, and then ultimately deliver a device exploit or an elevation of privilege, which are most wanted number 2 and most wanted number 1, which we're going to be talking about over the next 2 weeks, rogue profiles next week, and then OS exploits and another compromises the week after that. In order to remain persistent, in order to be able to operate across applications, in order to do all the things that hackers want to do on mobile devices, they need to maintain that persistent foothold. So these are the primary attacks that we're talking about. And clearly today, we're talking about phishing. If you ask any security professional, what is the single biggest security risk? If you would have asked that question back in the 90s when I first started doing this stuff, or in the 2000s, in the 2010s, etc., the answer has always been the same despite the attack vectors. Carbon-based life forms, human beings, employees, consumers. You could say we make really bad decisions, and a lot of times we do make really bad decisions, but sometimes even when we're making really decent decisions, the bad guys are a step ahead of us, right? So the interesting thing is, if you ask any security professional who's the biggest risk, they're going to say people. People make mistakes, right? Well, we made those comments coming from the era that we're kind of moving through right now, which is most of these carbon-based life forms were inside of networks that we've spent billions of dollars to harden. They were on devices, laptops, et cetera, and PCs that we controlled the patch management system. We controlled the antivirus system. So it was something that wasn't leaving the comfortable confines until later, with laptops. But even then, we controlled all the other security mechanisms centrally, right? Well, in mobile, the user is the admin. So now you've taken these people that traditionally make questionable decisions and you give them a supercomputer and you allow them to go outside of your protected network, and they have to decide when they're going to patch. They have to decide what networks they're going to connect to. They decide what apps to download, and just like they have even on traditional endpoints, they decide what emails to click on and what phishing attempts to, they don't think of them as phishing attempts, obviously, but what emails to click on, what text to click on in order to go to a potentially malicious site. So phishing is very real in traditional endpoints, and it's even more real, if not more so, and more dangerous on mobile. So what exactly is phishing, just to make sure we're on the same definition, because there's a couple variations of the theme. Phishing itself is where major brands quite often are the ones that get imitated. So they will actually send the email. We've all been through the phishing stuff, et cetera. So the reason I put this in here is this is separate and distinct from spear phishing, right? Spear phishing, who gets imitated from spear phishing is the CEO, the HR department, IT department, somebody that's within your own enterprise. And ultimately, when somebody goes and compromises a device, they can actually use that device to send really, really, really scary spear phishing attacks because it's coming from the CEO's phone, for instance, right? So it's a very different, but this specifically, what we're talking about today in the grand scheme of things is really about phishing. How do we actually, what is phishing and how does it impact it from a mobile standpoint? What are the goals? Well, the goals for mobile phishing are the same as every other phishing. First and foremost is credentials. No matter what anybody says, and we're starting to create great strides towards coming up with some other authentications and some other techniques. For the vast majority of people, they use the same password no matter where they are. So if I can start to figure out what the naming convention is for a username, I can take whatever password I took from you from a phishing site And I can use that on the consumer phishing side, but I can also potentially use it to do a little bit of brute force attempts to see whether or not it's going to work on any other corporate-based systems. And then there's weaponization. If I phish you, and if you click on that email and you go to that site, I can also deliver an exploit to compromise that device, to weaponize it, as I was talking about with the device stuff earlier. So the goals are still the same, whether you're on a laptop or whether you're on a tablet. They're still ultimately the same. I want credentials. I want to weaponize the endpoint. So mobile phishing, kind of how is that similar and or different, right? If you open your email on a tablet or smartphone, or if you get a text, SMS, whatever the case, message, Facebook Messenger, chat, whatever the case may be, you go to the fake website. It is able to determine what kind of system you are. And of course, the first thing it's going to do is try and get you to give up, let's say in this case, your credentials, right? And I'm just using eBay just as an example. It could be anybody, right? But the other thing it can do is, similar to a network attack, it can basically, based on what device it is that's accessing it, it can actually weaponize it by saying, I know that this is an iOS version 8, for instance. Now, a point back on that is we do global threat reports all the time, once a quarter, and I mentioned that the users are the admins. The users are the ones who decide when they're going to update their operating system. Pretty consistently, the number is around 70% of the devices, particularly those that are in the consumer market, but 70% of the devices that when we do these reports are on out-of-date operating systems. It's higher for Android because Android's more complicated. It's lower for iOS. iOS hovers around a third. Android's closer to 80%, but given their market share worldwide, that's why it kind of dominates up to around 70. The reason is Apple, whenever they push a patch out, they say they control the device and everything. So when they're done with the patch, it's made available through the carriers directly to all the end users, and then it's up to the end users to either set auto update or to do it themselves. A lot of people don't do auto update because some of the updates in the past have caused issues like slowing down the machine, right? On Android side, they actually, when Google produces a patch for Android, they give it to each of the handset manufacturers, and each one of them have to negotiate with the carriers on when it's going to get pushed out, and then ultimately users have to accept it. So these devices are pretty consistently out of date and vulnerable. So when they hit the phishing site, one of the things it can do is it can determine what kind of device this is and deliver the right exploit to be able to weaponize it. Now they're in the game. How big of a deal is this? Well, from the Verizon breach report, which everybody knows is kind of the holy book of the security world, it comes out every year, and the Verizon guys do fantastic work. 90% of the breaches, according to them, started with some variation of a phishing attack. Some variation of a phishing attack. Now, when you combine that with the fact that over 60% of emails are now being opened on mobile devices, that's a pretty interesting set of statistics. So basically, if almost 2/3 of the emails are being opened on mobile and 90% of the breaches start with a phishing attack, which generally is started by email, of course, there's more vectors on mobile like text, messenger, etc. This is a very real problem. And it's a very real problem, especially for entities that don't have any visibility or any endpoint security, what's called mobile threat defense in Gartner terminology, on those mobile devices. So basically exposing yourself to either credential stealing or, potentially more dangerously, weaponization of the phone. So how does Zimperium specifically help with phishing attacks? We've got one engine, it's called Z9. Z9 is a machine learning based engine. I mentioned that from the very beginning, we've been designed to protect enterprises against targeted attacks. One of the basic points is, as I mentioned earlier, we believe that the vast majority of targeted attacks start with a network attack. Matter of fact, we don't believe it. We've got data to back it up. So the majority of these attacks start with a network attack. then they were able to compromise the device if they're not adequately protected. Once they've compromised the device, then they can do anything they want across this entire thing. If the bad guy controls the network, our premise from the very beginning is, and has been, you can't do your detection in the cloud. You have to do your detection, 100% of your detection on device. Now, there are some companies that are out there that say that they do on-device detection. We really encourage people to try, and we really encourage people to push, because almost everybody in this market does some deterministic, signature-based detection of malicious apps, and they have a small portion of the most popular ones out there right now on device. To us, that is not on-device detection. We would never even claim that that's on-device detection. We need on-device detection of never before seen attacks, which are the ones that are going to be used in targeted attacks. So we believe you have to do machine learning-based detection of all these attack vectors on the device. So we train in a lab against billions of data points. We have tens of millions of endpoints around the world. We learn what is the right way to detect each one of these attacks based on the systems that we're on. And then we actually put those little formulas down, what are called classifiers. And they're the ones that actually do the detection in real time, even of unknown threats. And we are the only one, for instance, that can do on-device detection of malicious apps on device for Android. I mean, the only one in the business. As a matter of fact, there's going to be a blog coming out pretty soon about some of the totally brand new things that we've been discovering that have never even been seen by anybody else, and we're actually providing them back to the industry so that everyone knows about them. Today, of course, we're talking about phishing. Well, Z9 can be rolled out in one of two ways. It can either be rolled out as a product called ZIPS, which stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. This is basically next generation antivirus, if you will, for mobile. So it runs 100% of the time. If you're trying to protect your device, your employees' devices, and other ones that you're using throughout your enterprise, you want to protect that device, you want to protect that data 100% of the time, then you use ZIPS. If, however, you have a mobile app, then you can actually, we have a software development kit, an SDK called ZApp for in-app protection. And you can actually take Z9 and all of its detection capabilities and put it directly inside of a mobile app. So for instance, we have a large financial services customer that we did a webinar on and with just a little while ago. They're using ZIPS to protect hundreds of thousands of employees. They're using ZApp to protect, I think right around now, it's close to 26, 30 million mobile banking users. Different use case. In the ZIPS case, you're protecting the device 100% of the time and all your data and all your assets. In the ZApp case, you're protecting that session from the dirtiness that is on that endpoint device that previously you didn't have any visibility into. Both of those come into our Z console, which is our cloud-based console. Because we do all of our detection on device, and another huge benefit for us is our console is not tied into just one cloud provider. The folks that are doing cloud-based detection are on AWS, for instance. If you like AWS, that's great. We can work on AWS. But if you like Google Cloud, if you like Azure, Oracle Cloud, whatever, you can put it on whoever you want. Behind that is a product called, or a capability called Z3A that stands for Advanced App Analysis. I mentioned Mobile Menace number 7 was risky apps. Our Advanced App Analysis is a mobile app reputation service which will come back for every application that's in your environment, mobile application, and give you privacy and security risks and scores so you can decide if you want to fix them or ban them, whatever the case may be. Z Console is tied in with the largest set of enterprise mobility management providers out there. We're also the only one that has multiple EMMs that can be handled in one console. So if you have inherited multiple EMMs or if you're transitioning from one to the other, we're the only ones that can handle that without any friction at all. We're also the only ones who have actually taken our agent and actually, with the Z app, embedded it right inside of one of the EMM agents, and we've done that with our partner MobileIron. So with MobileIron, you would have, as soon as you say, if you're a MobileIron customer, you say, hey, I want protection against phishing or anything else, you basically say, I want it now, and they just change the SKU, you have 100% coverage, and it's on-device detection and remediation right then and there with no customer rollout, no end users getting in the way, nothing. So it's very powerful. And then we can take all of our threat data and put it down into SIMs. So specifically for phishing, we have a solution that we call Site Insight. And what it basically does is it warns the users from accessing sites before they go. So if they receive something in a text message or social or email, they see that link. When they click that link, it will actually warn them before they go. Now, it's important. We're not actually reading anything. The only thing we're paying attention to is you just clicked on a link, and that link is going to a site. You clicked on a link in one of these apps that are the targets for phishing, the initial bait for phishing. You click on it. That's when we say, hey, well, it's the site we're looking at. None of the messaging, none of the content. So all the privacy implications there are none. We've prided ourselves on being the most privacy-focused mobile threat defense provider. So, for instance, when GDPR came out in Europe, that didn't require us to do anything because we had already handled it. We already knew that there were options where people wanted to make sure that privacy was absolutely maintained. So that's been a strength of ours. And then all the forensics of either they clicked and then they clicked again, or they clicked and were warned, but then we can see, is there certain people that are getting targeted more than others? And that sort of thing gets logged into the console. So from a user standpoint, it's a pretty simple, straightforward, hey, this is badness. You probably don't want to go here. If they choose to go anyway, again, that is logged, et cetera, but we really encourage them, obviously, not to do it. And when it's logged, that data with a decent amount of forensics comes back in. Another consistent feedback that Zimperium gets is that our forensics, the level of our forensics, not only for phishing attacks like here, but across the board, is the best in the business. Some of the most security conscious federal agencies, financial institutions, healthcare institutions, utilities around the world, the forensics has been a huge component of why they have selected Zimperium. So with that, I want to thank you guys very much for taking the time to listen to us and understand a little bit more about mobile phishing. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in. I will wait a second or two to see if we do have any questions. I do not see any. So with that, what I'd like to do is just thank you all again for your time. Once again, the slides will be made available, as will the recorded webinar for anybody that wants. It'll be up on the site before too long. And next week, we're going to start going to the parts of the device that really matter, the top two mobile threats. Next week is going to be malicious profiles, which a lot of people don't know about, but it is a huge issue that really needs to be addressed. So I encourage you to join us for that one as well. Thank you so much, and have a great day.